So I don't know. Has anyone ever done an experience like this? And I can't say that there are lots of experiences like this out there. So I'd say that you can find these at a lot of different venues and a lot of different faculty development sessions. And they're useful to do. It's useful to revisit the concept of just trying to understand where is your place in the world, where are you now. And so this is Dr. Green, right? The senior emergency medicine resident. So any thoughts on trying to? Well, it's not an exact and easy correlation to say let's give some advice or mentorship or guidance to this person and then sort of extrapolate lessons learned from that to ourselves. But were there any sort of thoughts? Any thoughts on making the map for Dr. Green, just by what you were doing in these small groups? Go.
It took us a while to remind Dr. Green that she needed to get involved nationally, and all these people already know that. But, but it took us kind of till the end to be like, oh, she's got to get involved on a national scale and have collaborators to help grow her career.
It's interesting because I saw that there. I saw it earliest, here, like in this group here. You were talking about some professional society work, and so like let's say SAEM being one example of that. But there are these. The world can be a big place, and we can stretch our boundaries. And if we think very locally, there's going to be lots of intimate connections and lots of personal connections that we probably need to make, but yet there are these other connections that can be just as intimate and perhaps even more powerful, or at least equally as powerful, just by going beyond the physical walls of your, the brick and mortar of your own place. And so that's something that I sort of just took down. I typed down as an observation. I said, wow, it can start out very local, and it should be very local, right? Like obviously you've got to navigate in the situation that you're in, and Dr. Green needs some help in her specific situation. And so lessons learned at one organization might not transfer to another, or even expertise in navigating one system might not translate over to expertise in navigating the same, using the same skill set necessarily in a different system, right? There's always changes. The map and the terrain always change when you move, especially. So it's always it's useful though to make, I guess, the connections explicit and to sort of see what are the connections that I have, what are the connections that I should be building, how can I use the ones that don't physically exist in my own local institution so that I can help find my place and navigate to where I want to be. Right? That's something that's useful. Were there any other sort of thoughts?
We touched just a little bit, and might have been deviating a little bit to the weeds a bit, but just talking about like wellness and like family and keeping those things important. I think sometimes it's easy to get lost in like we're always reaching for that next step, always that what's our next step in our career, our trajectory, and forgetting like she mentions at some point I want to have a family, I want to have kids, and I think you can lose that really easily, especially kind of at the genesis of your career.
Oh, definitely. Sort of selling your soul, so to speak, to sort of achieve something, if I could use that metaphor. It's very important. Like some of this, to not recognize that some of the spheres of influence or some of the stakeholders to whom we are beholden in our professional lives also extend beyond the professional life, and they go to the personal life. So each of us has a family, we have friends, we have other interests outside of emergency medicine, and those are important. And they're important for our own wellness, like to be productive in emergency medicine and academic emergency medicine. It can be a grind. It can be a rewarding and fulfilling grind, but it nevertheless can be a grind. And to have those other sort of pursuits and to recognize where those pursuits are and to actually explicitly sort of mark them out sometimes is important just to keep us grounded. I totally agree. So it might be useful to sort of let Dr. Green know, hey, that these are, you want to keep attention to those things, and you'll have to find whatever balance works for you. For Dr. Green, if we're talking to her, or for each of us, what's the balance that's right for us? There may not be any balance. I don't know what the correct term is nowadays, but they would say that you can sort of do both, and you can be some superhuman person. I think COVID sort of set us grounded us a little bit in that, and to say, wow, we can't be in maybe everything to all people and even to ourselves at all times. And that's okay. But we also have aspirations, and if we want to get someplace, it's just important to map that out. So I think it is important. In fact, I would say that then if you think about who are the stakeholders, if I go back to like some of the initial framing questions just to make them explicit, here, so recognize that Dr. Green and all of us, we do have stakeholders that exert influence over our careers. Dr. Green has stakeholders that will exert influence over her career as well. Some of those will be professional, some of those will be personal. Were there any other sort of thoughts, observations from making the connections? Well, first of all, were there connections that were made to either like positions or to people, that you did for Dr. Green that you hadn't really thought of, like the newer connections that you didn't really know existed? Did you find connections that were new? So every connection that's there is something that that's a connection that I would know at my place. I know that there's a position like that, and that's somebody that I would, if I was in this sort of circumstance, that's somebody that I would have found. I know that position exists. For example, like a designated institutional officer. Don't know that one. I'm trying to think of another one just off the top of my head. I'm trying to think of other positions. That's the one I think of. Maybe well, I know in this chart over here they had vice chair of education. But a vice chair of education can mean a lot of different things at a lot of different places, so we put that label up. And that was it was a different label, I think, on this graphic compared to residency program director. And those were two different positions of people that could have influence on Dr. Green, yet I know in my organization, the vice chair of education is the residency program director label. Like that's what the system that I work in, that's what they've adopted as the label for the residency program director. So I was like, wow, I want to be a vice chair of education, but then said, yeah, this is what the job description is. And I look at the job description, it's like program director. I'm like, that's not a vice chair of education in the way that I would think of it in a bigger scheme. What about the concept of a service line? I don't know if that came up. I don't know, any thoughts on that one? Well, to think about the situation, I guess, let's see. I'm going to throw a couple other questions just off of this list. I'm going to go back to Dr. Green again for a moment. Did you happen to, I heard these words sort of pop up a little bit. I don't know if they popped up in every group, but in thinking about what your role was to Dr. Green and then thinking about the other people that she should maybe have connections with, do any of these sort of words sort of categorize the type of people that she should come in touch with, or do any of those describe some of the roles that you have in helping to advise Dr. Green? Like, for example, would you consider yourself in this sort of simulation with Dr. Green, would you consider yourself an advisor, a mentor, a sponsor, or a coach? And what's the, I don't know, those words do have some meaning in the literature now. They've sort of been, a little bit more well-defined, but have you heard these words before, and are these explicitly clear, like what the difference might be? Sure.
Mentor has a little bit broader meaning and a little bit more relational commitment.
Sure.
I don't know if that's true.
At least in my experience, it seems to be, somewhat like an advisor might give you some timely information and a specific period of time. Mentors, when you find them, when you find the right ones especially, they can sometimes be lifelong, or at least, for an extended duration of time as you're on a certain part of your trajectory or journey. Sponsor is a word that's sort of newer. I don't know if anyone's heard that word and how that might differ from what a mentor would be. Like, what is sponsor? So I'm seeing some no's. Like, what is a sponsor? I'm going to throw it out there just to sort of see what people think about this. But a sponsor might be the person who possibly opens a door, gets you into a room, and there might be an open chair. And they might give you a nudge, and that's about it. Like, they've opened the door, and you have to sort of look at the empty chair and say, wow, I'm the person who belongs in that chair. I should sit down. Maybe the mentor would, or maybe the coach would say, wow, you need to build up a skill set that makes you suitable for when the door is open, you're fast enough to move through it. You can see the open chair and you can sort of get yourself there. Maybe that sort of thing. Mentor guides you with some bigger questions, maybe some important professional life decisions. An advisor, just somebody that you can often sometimes bounce things off of. But we can blur the lines there a little bit, but maybe that's a way that I would sort of summarize that for folks. Let me go back to the other graphic if I can.
Like, if I could just build on this,
Sure.
I thought it was interesting when we were doing the key stakeholders, kind of thinking about what their role was, because some of it was who do you have to look good for or impress to keep your employment or keep moving forward that you already interact with, and then also maybe who do you need to get on the radar of
Yeah.
as you're thinking longer term. I think that factors a little into advising versus mentoring versus sponsorship.
I think that's an excellent thought. I wanted to jump right on that because it's a good segue. So I'm pulling up Dr. Green. You know, I don't know. I'm just curious what people thought about the alignment of some of the things that she says. And is she, I think I heard in at least one of the groups, sort of in that direction, but possibly over here as well. Like, does she really know what she wants to do? Like, and that can be very hard. She's really early in the trajectory. It's fascinating that yesterday I got a chance to do the speed mentoring session as well. And so I got to meet like second and third year medical students. And I was like, they're already thinking about what fellowship they may want to consider and sort of what residency they want to do and what type of career. I was like, wow, that's way advanced more than I ever was. But there was at least one person I was like, wow, a little unsure exactly of what they want. And they said, and that's okay. She's a little bit further along in the trajectory, and at least immediately, like she knows that she's going to do this ultrasound fellowship. And then yet, she says that she wants to be a professor, which is fine. I guess the question I would have for her is, does she understand exactly what she's using the phrase full professor. So what is a full professor? Like I would ask the question, maybe like does she understand the professoriate from an academic sense? Like what is an instructor, an assistant professor, associate professor, full professor? What are adjuncts? All that sort of stuff. It might get a little much for a session like today, but what does that mean? If she wants to get there at the medical school, like assuming that, I'll take that all on faith, is this involvement in GME as an APD and core faculty, which might be something that she's seen, is that the way to get there? And I didn't know what people thought about that. Because it was interesting. That was like part of this discussion over in this area. And I don't know if that's what you were sort of going into. First, any thoughts?
I would say that can be one way, but given what she's already doing with ultrasound, it may not be the way that leverages her talents the best. And I do often see this in residents, kind of this assumption that is enough. Like I'm just going to go now teach residents and somehow that equals academic medicine.
Yeah, sure.
Well, it may just be also where in the timeline she is. Right? So for the first 2 or 3 years when she's out of fellowship, developing herself, her own niche may be adequate, and she may be able to sort of be working on both as an instructor, but also, maybe becoming an APD in a content area.
Mm-hmm.
But then, if she wants to move, like you said, beyond that to an assistant or associate professor, she's going to need to define herself better. And she may be able to do it partly as the APD, but knowing that she's got to create a niche area with scholarship is different from just, teaching residents at the bedside.
Yes.
And that's often a really rude awakening for most people.
Yeah, it's hard, right? So she has lots of opportunities. This is still like a blank page, almost like an open field, so she can navigate in a lot of remarkable ways. So if she's, so she's going to have this excellent clinical expertise. I'm assuming that most ultrasound fellowships, they have a scholarly component, probably a research component, but I think the large bulk of it, at least the way that I see the one in my system, is very heavy in experiential learning, skill development, so that way you become an excellent practitioner. So you're using the ultrasound as your stethoscope of the 21st century. It's going to augment your clinical skills, but as an offshoot of that, you can probably translate that into some sort of scholarship or research as well. It's interesting, like if, like some of the things I see when I see this. And so it's an interesting study. And I'm not an ultrasonographer. I'm actually a dinosaur, so it's horrible for me. But I'm a simulationist, so I can pretend that I do ultrasound. But if I'm seeing these connections, like if she wanted to get into the medical school, one thing is that ultrasound is an opportunity. It often penetrates medical schools now at a much earlier stage. And so I would say this is, if she wants to build up a skill set with education, then maybe she can build that up here if she's going to get into these positions. But if she thought about, wow, how do I get into the medical school? If I get an appointment at a medical school, if I'm at this tertiary center, and if I have this appointment in this academic practice partnership, then I might be able to leverage this skill, go right directly to the medical school. I might not need to be involved in GME as a stepping stone to that. We don't know much about Dr. Green. Like, we don't know if the reason why she's looking at GME is only because it's the thing that she sees, or it's truly the passion it's the direction that she wants to go. I mean, you can, obviously, like I think there's plenty of people in the room and here at the meeting who have built research and scholarship leading to high academic rank at a university, and have done it through the GME pathway. You can do it, it's just different. Right? But notice that it was interesting, like at least a couple of different groups came to the same determination that if she wants to go here at the medical school, then she has to interface with the medical school, and that medical school leadership might not be the same leadership as the leadership at Numbers Health that handles GME. Like UME and GME, they speak to one another, but are they the same people? People cross over, they cross worlds, but are they the same spheres? I'll even throw out another thing. There are some other sort of this, just to make it, while I have the random thought in my head, there are other stakeholders to whom she's beholden. There's stakeholders to whom all of the different people that she's working through are beholden. I just want to put it out there that depending on how big you want to create the world, or you want to envision the world, I mean, she's got to get that credential. Like she's got to pass the fellowship, I guess, so to speak. And so many of you have put the stakeholder to whom she's beholden most immediately will probably be her fellowship director, and then the other core faculty, maybe her fellow colleagues. And then she will have attachments to maybe the other learners that fellowship supports. And then to the patients ultimately. But she does have a credentialing sort of body that she probably has to answer to, and there's probably an accreditation organization that probably handles that piece. And every one of these layers has those pieces too. So credentialing and accreditation, oftentimes we do it automatically because as we move through our own worlds personally, we have to get credentialed, we have to be in programs that are accredited. Do we think about those? I think we think about them because we need to get a license, we need to be able to practice, we need to get boarded, and getting those things are important efforts that help put us on the map sometimes, or help keep us on the map in certain worlds. So just to make that explicit. Were there any other sort of thoughts, questions regarding this? I have one or two other things that I wanted to show and to describe, but I wanted to just keep it open for a moment. Go. This is you.
How, early in your career, we talked a lot about making these connections, saying yes to things to get your foot in the door. How do you avoid yes fatigue? Saying yes to everything?
Like mission creep, I call that, right? So how do we avoid saying yes to everything? So I think there's a lot of wisdom in the room, so I'm going to farm this one out first. So how do you, because actually I need the advice too. You're looking at somebody who early in, we can talk about me later. I will, but let's put it out there first. How do you say no without saying no? How do you say yes to the things that are most important? How do you identify what's most important? Any advice?
Enthusiastic.
Yeah.
Is it your chair?
Yeah. Yeah. If you think about where your place is in the world, and who are the stakeholders to whom you are most beholden? That's probably the first thing. I think it's very important to say who's asking the question. So there are certain asks that can't, I almost feel implied that you just can't say no to because they're part of like you're paying the bills, so to speak, at the same time as you're developing your own interest. So I did pay the bills personally, so I'll bring in my own experience. I did. I was early in my career, I stayed always within the system. It wasn't a system back when I started, but there was a system that I started in when I graduated residency. I graduated in 2000. From 2000 to 2003, interesting, they said, we'll give you a half-time contract to work both at the tertiary center and work at a community site that was a little bit further away. I said, no problem. That effectively, though, became 100% community site-based practice for those first 3 years. And so I was never at the tertiary. I sort of realized real quick, wow, I'm not at the tertiary. So an invitation came in. We're looking for someone to write exams for residents on a quarterly basis. And I said, I want to get back into the education. That's really what was important to me. And Rosh Review wasn't around. Other commercially available sort of venues weren't around. The in-training exam was still on paper with a visual stimulus book. I said, all right, that's my in. I said yes to that one. I came back, I did some per diem shifts. Those were yeses. Those were on top of the other shift load that I was doing. I did sacrifice a little bit. You talk about the personal stakeholders. I was single, which helped. I did get married within 3 years, though, so that changed things. But on the leverage of those things and then just taking some chances and opportunities. For example, going to a staff meeting at the tertiary where there was a request for proposals for a low-level grant. Not a hard grant to write. 4 pages, it was like a quickie. Like, it's not an NIH sort of application with 50 or 60 pages. I submitted that thing in and said yes to those things. Then the ask came back, wow, do you want to be an APD? So when the APD thing came around, I said yes to that. That got me back in the door. That position, though, I held on to for about 11 years, which was a long run as APD with no probably movement upward. And I had to think about what do I really want to do? And I kept in that space. Many of you will find that if you say yes to those things and you do them well, it may be hard to get out of them. You'll have to set up legacy planning then. How do you sort of move off the position if you want to move? I didn't know that then, so I couldn't get out of the position. I felt I couldn't get out. And so I kept saying yes to a lot of things because every yes brought a buy down in protected time. Like that's what a concept in emergency medicine is pretty common, I guess. But so I would say yes to this. That will knock off another 4 hours of shift work. So I was able to sort of navigate a career where I went from, let's say, 28 clinical hours down to 24 to 20 to 16. I was like, wow, that's 16 hours a week. Now I'm sacrificing some things. I'm not practicing, but it was difficult. I was like, wow, what do I do? You have to be careful when you say yes or no. If the stakeholder is very important, like a chair, you might have to say yes, but you also are within your right to say no, and you have to know where those points are. So maybe one thing that I would say is like, as we're thinking about things, I'll wrap up things here. There's a couple of things to know, like when do you say yes, when do you say yes, when do you say no? How to advise her. One thing is I would say is I always ask, now I ask learners that I have a relationship with, like fellows, or with residents that I'm going to mentor, I'll ask them to set up a set of core values, set up a noble purpose statement. I actually make them write this and sort of list these things out. As a health professions educator, I'll put down a list of what are my core values as an educator, and I make it very explicit, like these are the things that are not negotiable. I'm not leaving this mission, and I'm not leaving this purpose, and I'm not leaving the core values. And then every other sort of decision hopefully aligns along that. And if part of that core value set is like, what am I doing with my family or my personal interests? That's part of that, because that's not negotiable. Did you want to say something?
Do you think that would also say in addition to that is, like, look to make your own guesses? So we always think a lot about what gets offered to us, and when we say yes or no, but also what can you seek out? It's kind of in strategy or in line with your mission. The other thing, and it sounds kind of premature, but it isn't even as a fellow, is I would look ahead to what does an assistant professor need? Because ultimately that'll be your goal if you're an academic anywhere. And kind of does that 8th book chapter, there's a lot of work that's not in
Yeah, I just want to mention a couple of things. When you have a free moment, think about drawing what's called an organograph. And so I didn't come up with the term. It comes from Harvard Business Review. They use it at Harvard Macy a lot, so I like it. It's not exactly the same thing as the exercise that we would do. But Mitzberg and Vander Hayden spoke about 4 types of relationships when you try to draw your place in an organization from a business sense. And a lot of times in business, and even in healthcare, it's moving, but a lot of times there are what they call sets. Sets are sort of like these individual siloed sort of divisions. Like think about Department of Science, Department of Biology and a Department of Chemistry at a university. They may not talk to one another. You have chains, like supply chains. Think about a resident going from first to third year, and think about simulation coming in here and ultrasound coming in here, and then simulation and ultrasound coming in here, and everybody's working to the development of a product, which is the best resident, let's say. I would say the movement here is to recognize these. Like, can you, if you want to, one of the things about finding your place in the world is, you want to be valuable to an organization, and you want to know that they find value in you. To sometimes find those people who have value or offer value in an organization, sometimes those are people where information comes in and out of. Think about your assistant program directors. Think about those people in your organization that are like the non-commissioned officers in the Army. They take information in and they sort of put it out to other places. Those are known as hubs. And then obviously, like there are networks. There are like groups and collections of people where there's no leadership. To show you, I'm going to end here. So you can linger for questions. I'm going to show you 2 things. First of all, not to scare you, but this is what my world looked like. If you want to take a shot of that. It's complicated, so it would take more than probably 50 minutes. But for this one particular problem, I was having a dilemma, and I lived there. So that's where I was. But that was my map of my world, my system. So you don't have to make it that fancy, but you could think about what are all the players in your world. It gets big. Just remember that there is a partnership between an academic site and a practice. That in the nursing world, they call that an academic practice partnership. We call it probably an affiliation, but I think it's more than just an affiliation. The map is not the terrain. Think about your core values and the noble purpose. I'm going to stop here, but I'm going to put up just this sort of graphic. If you want to get access to that article, I think it's a cool read. If you want to sort of pull that up, if you want to see the slides, they're there. If you want to have that handout, you can do with it what you'd like. I'll stop there.